The stone struck Ayana's shoulder with enough force to send her stumbling backward, her worn moccasins scraping against the church steps. Laughter erupted from the group of townsfolk gathered near the iron gates, their Sunday finest contrasting sharply with her tattered doeskin dress. "Go back to your people, savage!" Margaret Whitmore's shrill voice cut through the morning air like a blade. The banker's wife clutched her pearl necklace as if Ayana's mere presence might contaminate her. "This is a house of God, not some heathen trading post." Ayana pressed her palm against the bleeding scrape on her arm, her dark eyes never leaving the ground. She had been coming here for 3 weeks now, not to beg for coins as they assumed, but searching for answers about the strange dreams that plagued her nights, visions of a golden eagle soaring above endless grasslands, calling to her in a voice she couldn't understand. "Look at her, pretending to be hurt," sneered Deputy Marshal Cornelius Briggs, spitting tobacco juice that barely missed her feet. "These Apache know nothing but lies and thievery. Should run her out of town like we did the rest of her kind." The crowd murmured their agreement, emboldened by Briggs' words. More stones appeared in eager hands. Ayana's fingers instinctively moved to the small medicine pouch her grandmother had given her before the soldiers came, before everything changed. The familiar weight of the sacred stones inside gave her strength to remain standing. "Please," she whispered, finally lifting her gaze to meet their hostile stares. "I only seek understanding of understanding." Margaret's laugh was sharp and cruel. "The only thing your kind understands is taking what doesn't belong to you. Just like you took our land, our peace." The irony wasn't lost on Ayana, but she bit back her response. These people had taken everything from her family, her home, her very identity, yet they spoke of theft as if they were the victims. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "When the wolf shows its teeth, little star, sometimes the wisest rabbit stays perfectly still." Father Mackenzie appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern, but before he could speak, another voice cut through the crowd's jeers. "What exactly are we celebrating here, folks?" The voice was deep, measured, and carried an authority that made even Deputy Briggs shift uncomfortably. The crowd parted like water around a ship's bow as boots struck the wooden planks of the church porch with deliberate precision. Ayana looked up to see a man descending the steps, his presence commanding immediate attention. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of countless hours under the desert sky. His clothes were simple but well-made dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a black hat that cast shadows across features that were both rugged and refined. But it was his eyes that held her captive pale green like winter sage, and filled with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Cale Montrose," Margaret breathed, her entire demeanor shifting from righteous anger to nervous deference. "We were just, that is, this Apache girl has been bothering the churchgoers, and we're throwing stones at an unarmed woman half your size?" Cale's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the silk. His gaze swept over the crowd before settling on Ayana, and she felt something stir in her chest. Recognition that went deeper than sight. The golden eagle from her dreams had the same pale green eyes. "Now see here, Montrose," Deputy Briggs stepped forward, hand resting on his gun belt. "Just because you own half the territory doesn't mean you can interfere with keeping the peace." "This squaw," the word died on his lips as Cale's hand moved with lightning speed, catching Briggs' wrist in a grip that made the deputy wince. "Choose your next words very carefully, Cornelius," Cale said quietly, "because the lady and I are about to have a conversation, and I'd hate for you to say something that might complicate things." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the richest, most powerful man in 3 counties stepped between them and the Apache girl they'd been tormenting, his protective stance as unmistakable as a declaration of war. Cale released Deputy Briggs' wrist with deliberate slowness, the lawman stumbling backward and nearly tripping over his own spurs. The crowd that had been so bold moments before now shuffled their feet like scolded children, suddenly finding the ground fascinating. "I believe Father Mackenzie was about to begin the morning service," Cale said, his tone pleasant enough to pass for casual conversation, though everyone present understood it as the dismissal it was. "Wouldn't want to keep the Lord waiting, would we?" Margaret Whitmore's face cycled through several shades of red as she struggled between her desire to maintain social standing with the most eligible bachelor in the territory and her outrage at being dismissed. "Mr. Montrose, surely you can't mean to—" "That is, she's clearly disturbed, what I can see," Cale interrupted, his pale green eyes never leaving Ayanna's face, "is a young woman who's been injured by a mob of people who should know better." He removed a pristine white handkerchief from his vest pocket, approaching Ayanna with the careful movements of someone accustomed to working with spooked horses. "May I?" Ayanna stared at the offered cloth, then at the man extending it. In her dreams, the golden eagle had always remained at a distance, soaring high above her reach. She had never imagined it might land close enough to touch. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, accepting the handkerchief with trembling fingers. The fabric was softer than anything she had touched in months. "They're right about one thing, I don't belong here. Belonging isn't about birth or blood," Cale said quietly, positioning himself between her and the lingering crowd. "It's about character. And anyone brave enough to face down a mob for whatever brought them to this place has more character than most." Ayanna pressed the handkerchief to her bleeding arm, the simple kindness nearly undoing her carefully maintained composure. "You don't know what brought me here. You don't know what I am. I know you're hurt," he said simply. "And I know that's not acceptable to me." The words hit her like a physical blow, not from their force but from their gentleness. No one had spoken to her with such basic human respect since the soldiers had dragged her family away. She found herself studying his face, searching for the calculation or pity she expected to find, but saw only a steady warmth that made her pulse quicken. "Cale," Deputy Briggs called from a safe distance, his voice straining to sound official. "You can't just interfere with municipal peacekeeping. There are laws about vagrants and— Are you planning to arrest her, Cornelius?" Cale turned slightly. Not enough to expose Ayanna, but enough to fix the deputy with a stare that could have frozen flame. "Because if you are, you'll need to arrest me too. Conspiracy, aiding and abetting, interfering with an officer, take your pick." The deputy's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Everyone in Copper Ridge knew that Cale Montrose's ranch employed half the town, his cattle sales financed the bank, and his word carried more weight than the mayor's. Arresting him would be professional suicide. No need for that kind of talk. Briggs muttered, already backing away. "Just keeping the peace is all." "Good," Cale nodded. "Then we're all in agreement that the peace is best kept by everyone going about their own business." As the crowd reluctantly dispersed, shooting curious glances over their shoulders, Ayanna found herself alone with a man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared voice. "Why?" she asked, the question escaping before she could. "Stop it. Why would you risk your reputation for someone like me?" Cale's smile was slow and warm, transforming his angular features into something that made her heart skip. "Someone like you? You mean someone brave enough to seek what they need despite the cost? Someone who stands their ground even when stones are being thrown?" He shook his head. "Miss, I've been waiting my whole life to meet someone exactly like you." The golden eagle in her dreams had never spoken, but somehow Ayanna had always known it was calling her home. Cale's invitation to join him for breakfast at the town's only decent restaurant sent ripples through Copper Ridge, like a stone dropped in still water. As they walked down Main Street, Ayana noticed how conversations stopped mid-sentence, how curtains twitched in windows, how the very air seemed to vibrate with whispered speculation. "They're staring," she murmured, her hand instinctively moving to cover the medicine pouch beneath her dress. "Let them," Cale replied, offering his arm with the same casual confidence he might show to any lady. "I've found that giving people something to talk about keeps them from focusing too much on their own shortcomings." The Copper Kettle restaurant fell silent as they entered, every patron frozen with forks halfway to their mouths. Cale guided Ayana to a corner table, pulling out her chair with the same courtesy he would show a duchess. "2 breakfast plates, Elena," he called to the wide-eyed proprietor, "and coffee strong enough to wake the dead." Elena Rodriguez nodded mutely, her usual cheerful chatter replaced by stunned compliance. Ayana had never sat at a table with real silverware, never been served by someone who treated her presence as normal rather than scandalous. "You still haven't told me why you were at the church," Cale said once Elena had bustled away, their coffee cups steaming between them like a peace offering. Ayana wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, gathering courage. "You'll think I'm mad. Try me." The simple challenge in his voice, free of mockery or condescension, made her decision. "I've been having dreams, visions, for months now, ever since." She paused, the memories still too sharp. "Ever since my family was taken to the reservation. There's always a golden eagle soaring above grasslands that stretch beyond the horizon. It calls to me, but I can never understand the words." Cale's cup stopped halfway to his lips. "A golden eagle?" "Yes, and recently the dreams have been different. The eagle leads me here, to this town, to the church. It's trying to tell me something, but I don't know what." She met his eyes, expecting to see skepticism or worse. Instead, she found something that looked remarkably like recognition. "3 weeks ago," Cale said slowly, "I started having dreams. 2 strange ones. I'm riding across the plains, but I'm not alone. There's someone with me, someone I'm searching for, but I can never see their face clearly." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Until today. When I saw you on those church steps, everything clicked into place." The restaurant faded around them as Ayana stared into those pale green eyes, eagle's eyes, and felt the world shift on its axis. "That's impossible," she breathed. "Is it?" Cale reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers with the tentative touch of someone afraid the moment might shatter. "My grandmother was half Navajo. She used to tell me stories about spirit guides, about how souls could be connected across lifetimes, across cultures. I thought they were just ... stories. Your grandmother was native, yes. Married my grandfather when it was dangerous to do so, when it could have cost him everything. But love doesn't ask permission, does it?" Ayana's pulse thundered in her ears. "The people here, they don't know? They know my grandfather married someone exotic, someone who died when I was young. They assume she was Mexican, maybe Spanish. I've never corrected them because ... double quotes." He paused, searching for words. "Because I've been waiting to find someone worth sharing that truth with." Elena appeared with their breakfast, her movements careful and quiet, sensing the intensity of the conversation even if she couldn't understand its nature. The food sat untouched as Ayana processed what Cale had revealed. "So you understand," she said finally, "what it's like to live between worlds. To belong fully to neither," he agreed. "Until now." The weight of possibility hung between them, like a bridge waiting to be crossed. In her dreams, the golden eagle had always been alone, magnificent but solitary. She had never considered that it might be searching for its mate. "What happens now?" she asked, afraid of the answer, but more afraid of not knowing. Cale's smile was soft and sure. "Now we stop running from who we're meant to be. The confrontation Cale had been expecting arrived 3 days later in the form of Bancroft Wellington III, the territorial governor's nephew and a man who believed his political connections made him untouchable. He stormed into Cale's ranch house. Without knocking, his face flushed with indignation and whiskey. "Have you lost your goddamn mind, Montrose?" Wellington slammed his fist on the oak desk, making the oil lamp flicker. "The entire territory is talking about you parading around with that Apache whore." The words died in his throat as he found himself lifted off his feet and slammed against the wall. Cale's forearm pressed against his windpipe with just enough pressure to make breathing interesting. "Choose your words more carefully, Bancroft." Cale's voice was deadly quiet. "That lady you're referring to happens to be a guest in my home, and I take the honor of my guests very seriously." Wellington's eyes bulged as he clawed at Cale's arm. "Why, oh, you can't. This is ... assault? Threatening a government official?" Cale smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Funny thing about threats, Bancroft. They only work if the person you're threatening has something to lose." He released Wellington, who collapsed to the floor gasping and clutching his throat. Through the window, Ayanna's silhouette was visible. As she worked in the garden, her movements graceful despite the simple task of tending vegetables. "You do have something to lose," Wellington wheezed, struggling to his feet. "Your ranch, your business, your standing in this community. One word from me to my uncle, and you'll be investigated for harboring fugitive Indians, for sedition, for... What?" Cale turned back to face him, his composure absolute. "For treating a human being with basic decency? For refusing to participate in your mob mentality?" Wellington straightened his jacket, trying to reclaim his dignity. "She's not just any Indian, Montrose. Do you know who she really is?" Something in Wellington's tone made Cale pause. "Explain." "Ayanna Winsong, daughter of Chief Nalnish, the war leader who held off 3 cavalry companies for 6 months before. They finally cornered his band." Wellington's smile was ugly with triumph. "She's not some random beggar, you fool. She's Apache royalty, and harboring her makes you a target for every settler who lost family in the Indian Wars." The revelation hit Cale like a physical blow, not because it changed his feelings, but because it explained so much Ayanna's natural dignity, her careful way of speaking, the proud set of her shoulders even when facing a hostile mob. "She never told you, did she?" Wellington pressed his advantage. "Never mentioned that her father's war party killed over 200 white settlers? That there's still a bounty on any member of Nalnish's family?" Cale walked to the window, watching Ayanna, as she moved between the tomato plants with unconscious grace. Everything made sense now, the careful way she held herself, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the strength that had let her face down a mob rather than run. "Get out of my house, Bancroft." "What? You heard me. Get out. And take this message back to your uncle and anyone else who might be interested." Cale turned, his pale green eyes blazing with determination. "Ayanna Winsong is under my protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me. And anyone who threatens me had better be prepared for a war they can't win." Wellington backed toward the door, his face pale. "You're signing your own death warrant. Montrose, when word gets out who she really is, then I suggest you choose very carefully how that word gets out," Cale interrupted. "Because if anything happens to her, if she's harmed in any way, I'll hold you personally responsible. And unlike your uncle's political games, my response will be immediate and permanent." After Wellington fled, Cale remained at the window, watching. The woman who had turned his carefully ordered world upside down. A chief's daughter. Apache royalty. A princess hiding in beggar's clothes. It changed nothing and everything. The dreams made even more sense now. Destiny. Calling to destiny across the artificial boundaries men created. When Ayanna looked up and saw him watching, her smile was radiant enough to stop his heart. Whatever storms were coming, they would. Face them together. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace in Cale's study, Ayanna sensed the weight of unspoken words between them. She had grown accustomed to reading the subtle shifts in his expression, and tonight something troubled him deeply. "You've been quiet since Wellington left," she said, setting down her cup of coffee. "What did he want?" Cale studied her face in the flickering firelight, noting the way shadows played across her high cheekbones, the regal tilt of her chin that now made perfect sense. "He came to warn me about you." "About me?" Ayanna's hand moved instinctively to her medicine pouch. "What kind of warning?" "He told me who you really are," Cale said gently. "Ayanna Winsong, daughter of Chief Nalnish." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ayanna's face went pale, her carefully maintained composure cracking for the first time since he'd known her. She rose abruptly, moving to the window as if preparing to flee. "I should have told you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I should have. Why didn't you?" She turned to face him, her dark eyes bright with unshed tears. "Because I knew this would happen. I knew that once you learned who my father was, once you understood the blood on my family's name, you would see me differently." "You're right," Cale said, rising from his chair. "I do see you differently." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had expected this, had prepared for it, but the reality of his rejection still stole her breath. "I understand. I'll leave. Tonight, I see the woman who survived when her entire world was destroyed," Cale continued, crossing to her. "I see someone who chose compassion over bitterness, who sought understanding in a church rather than revenge on the people who took everything from her." Ayanna stared at him, afraid to hope. "My father's warriors killed innocent people. Women, children. Your father fought to protect his people when the government broke every treaty they'd ever signed," Cale interrupted. "When they tried to force your band onto a reservation where half the children died of disease and starvation. How do you? Because I make it my business to know the truth, not just the stories people tell to justify their actions." Cale's voice was firm but gentle. "I know about the massacre at Willow Creek where cavalry troops killed women and children under a flag of truce. I know about the forced march, the broken promises, the systematic destruction of everything your people held sacred." Ayanna's tears finally spilled over. No one had ever spoken of those things, the truths that had been buried under tales of savage Indians and heroic cavalry charges. "Your father wasn't a monster," Cale continued, reaching up to brush away her tears. "He was a man trying to save his people the only way he knew how, and you ... He cupped her face in his hands. "You are the most extraordinary woman I've ever met, regardless of whose blood flows in your veins. The townspeople will turn against you completely when they learn the truth," she said, leaning into his touch despite herself. "Wellington won't. Keep this secret. By tomorrow, everyone in Copper Ridge will know you're harboring Chief Nalnish's daughter." "Good," Cale said firmly. "Let them know exactly who they're dealing with. Let them understand that you're not some helpless beggar they can torment for sport." "Cale, you don't understand the danger." "I understand perfectly." His thumbs traced the line of her cheekbones. "I understand that I'm falling in love with an Apache princess who's been pretending to be powerless to protect the people around her. I understand that you've been carrying the weight of your father's war and your people suffering alone." The word love hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. "In my dreams," Ayanna whispered, "the golden eagle was always searching for something. I thought it was looking for a place to land, but now you know it was looking for its mate," Cale finished. "And it found her, disguised as a beggar outside a church, too proud to reveal her true nature." For the first time in months, Ayanna felt truly seen, truly known, and completely safe. Dawn brought trouble in the form of 50 armed men surrounding Cale's ranch house. their faces hard with the kind of righteous anger that justified any atrocity. Deputy Briggs sat his horse at their head, a federal marshal's badge gleaming on his chest. Apparently Wellington had called in favors overnight. Cale Montrose. Briggs' voice carried across the morning air. By order of the territorial marshal, you will surrender the fugitive Indian known as Ayanna Winsong for transport to the reservation. Inside the house, Ayanna moved away from the window where she'd been watching the sunrise. Her face was serene, but Cale could see the resignation. In her eyes, the same look he imagined condemned prisoners wore when they mounted the scaffold. "There's a back way through the canyon," she said quietly. "If you create a distraction, I can." "No." Cale's voice was absolute. He moved to his gun cabinet, selecting a Winchester rifle with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd fought in range wars. "I told you yesterday that you were under my protection. That wasn't a conditional offer. This isn't your fight. Everything about you is my fight now." He checked the rifle's action, then moved to the window. "Besides, they're making a crucial mistake." "What mistake?" Cale's smile was sharp as a blade. "They assume I'm alone." As if summoned by his words, riders appeared on the ridgeline surrounding the ranch, dozens of them, armed and silent, their horses stamping impatiently. Ayanna recognized them as Cale's ranch hands, but there were others too. Mexican vaqueros from the southern ranges, a few Navajo scouts she didn't recognize, and even some of the Chinese workers from the railroad camps. "How," she began. "Did you think word of Wellington's visit wouldn't spread?" Cale moved to another window, his movements calm and purposeful. "Half these men have worked for me for years. The other half know what it's like to be hunted for their blood rather than their actions." Outside, Briggs was clearly having second thoughts as he counted the rifles pointed down at his posse from the high ground. What had seemed like overwhelming odds minutes before now looked uncomfortably like a potential massacre. "Last chance." "Montrose," Briggs called, his voice less confident than before. "Hand over the squaw and we'll consider this a misunderstanding." Cale opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. The morning sun caught the silver threads in his dark hair, and Ayanna thought he looked like some ancient warrior god preparing for battle. "Cornelius." Cale's voice carried clearly across the yard. "You and I both know that badge you're wearing is about as legitimate as a $3 bill. Wellington might have bought you a federal appointment, but he can't buy you the authority to storm a man's property without proper warrant. We don't need a warrant for a fugitive Indian. You need a warrant for anything that happens on my land." Cale corrected. "And since I see Judge Morrison up there on that ridge with a rifle in his hands, I'm guessing he agrees with my interpretation of territorial law." Briggs twisted in his saddle, finally noticing that several of the men on the mat on the high ground wore badges of their own legitimate ones that outranked his questionable federal appointment. "This isn't over, Montrose." "Yes, it is." The voice came from behind the posse, and everyone turned to see Governor Wellington himself riding up with a small escort, his face thunderous with rage. But his anger wasn't directed at Cale. "Bancroft!" The governor's voice could have shattered glass. "Did you honestly think I wouldn't hear about you using my name to start a private war? You've embarrassed this family and this territory for the last time." The younger Wellington spurred his horse forward from the posse, his face desperate. "Uncle, I was only trying to get yourself and half these men killed over a personal grudge." The governor turned to address the crowd. "This operation is terminated immediately. Any man who fires a shot from this point forward will answer to me personally." The storm was breaking, but Ayanna sensed it was far from over. 6 months later, Ayanna stood in the garden she had planted behind Cale's house, their house now watching. The sun set over the mountains that had once seemed like prison walls. The late summer air carried the scent of ripening tomatoes and the distant sound of cattle lowing in the pastures. The wedding had been small but significant, performed by Father Mackenzie in the same church where she had once begged for understanding. Judge Morrison had officiated the legal ceremony, while an elderly Navajo medicine man, Cale's great-uncle, had blessed their union according to the old ways. The townspeople of Copper Ridge had initially been scandalized, but prosperity had a way of softening moral outrage. Cale's ranch had expanded dramatically, his cattle operations now employing half the territory. When people needed work, needed credit at the bank, needed someone to stand up to the railroad companies trying to steal their land, they found their principles remarkably flexible. Mrs. Montrose. The name still sounded strange in her own ears, but she was learning to wear it with pride. "I like the sound of that," Cale's voice came from behind her, his arms circling her waist as he pulled her back against his chest. "How? Was your day in town?" Ayanna leaned into his warmth, marveling at how completely her life had transformed. "Interesting. Mrs. Whitmore actually nodded to me at the general store. And Elena Rodriguez asked for my grandmother's recipe for healing. Tea. The world is full of miracles," Cale murmured against her ear, his breath sending familiar shivers down her spine. "There's something else." Ayanna turned in his arms, studying his face in the golden light. "I received a letter today." "From the reservation?" Cale's expression grew serious. Any communication from that direction carried weight, usually tragic. "My cousin writes that the Indian agent has been replaced. The new one is actually trying to improve conditions, and he's asked for teachers. People who can bridge both worlds. Help the children learn to navigate what's coming while keeping their heritage alive." "And you want to help?" It wasn't a question. Cale knew her well enough to read the longing in her voice, the need to give purpose to all the pain her people had endured. "It would mean spending part of each month there," she said carefully. "Away. From here, from you? Then I'll come with you." "Cale, the reservation is no place for someone who loves you? Someone who wants to support your work?" His hands framed her face, thumbs tracing the familiar lines of her cheekbones. "Ayanna, did you think marriage meant you had to give up being who you are?" The tears came suddenly, born of relief and overwhelming love. "I thought I might have to choose. The only choice you have to make is whether you trust me enough to let me be part of this with you." She rose on her toes to kiss him, pouring all her gratitude and love into the connection between them. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "In my dreams now," she whispered, "the golden eagle isn't alone anymore. It flies with its mate, and together they soar higher than either could alone." "Destiny has a sense of poetry," Cale agreed. Who would have thought a beggar outside a church and the territory's richest rancher would find their way to each other? "You were never just a rich rancher," Ayanna corrected. "You were a man with a good heart waiting for someone worthy of it. And I was never really a beggar." "No." Cale's smile was soft and sure. "You were a princess in exile, waiting for her kingdom to call her home." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they stood together in their garden, planning their future. They would build a school on the reservation, a place where Apache children could learn both worlds. They would raise their own children to be proud of all the blood that flowed in their veins. They would prove that love was stronger than prejudice, that understanding could triumph over hatred. The golden eagle had found its mate, and together they would soar beyond the boundaries others had tried to impose, creating a legacy of hope that would endure long after their earthly flight was done. In the distance, as if summoned by their dreams, the cry of an eagle echoed across the vast Montana sky, wild, free, and finally completely home.